Hi, I'm Kevin Eikenberry, the founder and facilitator of Virtual LeaderCon. What follows is one of the sessions from Virtual LeaderCon 2020, just one of the nearly 40 experts that I had join me, experts in leadership development, organizational development, and personal development. Hope you enjoy this session, and you can learn more about Virtual LeaderCon 2021 and how to join for free the week of September the 20th at virtualleadercon.com. If you miss the live sessions, lots of information and ways to get access to great content like what you're about to see, again, available at virtualleadercon.com. And now on with the session. Welcome back, everybody. Day one, session two, with the lovely and talented Mary Abbajay with me. I'm going to introduce her in just a second. I have to tell everybody that when we decided to put this together, and if you were on with me in session one, you heard me talk a little bit about it. And I started making an initial list of who I wanted to have join me. This young lady was on that initial list. And I'm so excited to have her here. Yeah, hashtag here we go. I love that. Thank you, Nikki. So let me tell you about Mary. Something about Mary. Isn't there a movie called Something About Mary?
There is.
I think I fell asleep doing it, if you want the truth. Let me tell you about Mary, and we're going to talk about the truth about toxic workplaces and toxic bosses. You can see her. Let me tell you a bit about her. She is the award-winning author of the best-selling Managing Up. I have a copy here somewhere. Do you have a copy?
Of course I do. Bam!
Managing Up. How to move up, win at work, and succeed with any type of boss. She's the president of Careerstone Group, a full-service organizational and leadership development consultancy that delivers leading-edge talent and organizational development solutions to businesses and the government. She's a sought-after speaker, author, virtual speaker, consultant trainer. She helps organizations deal with these things like creating strategies, building skills, and really making things work in your organization. She's a contributor on Forbes.com. Her work has been in the New York Times, Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, Forbes, Financial Times, Money Magazine, Southwest Airlines Magazine, Monster, the BBC. She's been on the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. And so here she's here. She's here for us to talk about toxic workplaces and toxic bosses. And that's what we're going to do. But I guess something else I need to do before we dive in, Mary, because I'm still learning how to do all this. So here's how you guys can win winning with Mary. Here's how you can win with Mary. So if you will promote during this session on LinkedIn, if you're on LinkedIn and go and say, hey, I'm having a great time at Virtual LeaderCon, and Lisa will tell you what you need to make sure you include so we can pick to choose you. And you're going to get a copy of Mary's book, Managing Up, signed by Mary. See right there, signed by Mary. You're going to get a copy. You can do that in LinkedIn. And we're also going to pick someone from the questions like we did the last time. So 2 chances to win. How about a third chance to win Mary's book? Because she's been on our podcast. If you're on LinkedIn and you go and sign up for our LinkedIn group for the podcast, which is you can go to remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. If you do that, third chance. First person to do that gets a copy of the book. 3 of Mary's books are going to go away in the next few minutes. That's it. And so, Mary, what makes a toxic workplace?
Well, Kevin, before we get there, you forgot the most important part of my bio, which was I'm a Kevin Eikenberry super fan. Like, let's not forget that. Like, super fan.
Hey, it wasn't on my list. I didn't know that.
Thank you for having me on the show. And I'm delighted to be part of this. All right, so what makes a toxic workplace or a toxic boss? Well, toxic workplaces are usually full of toxic bosses, so it's hard to have one without the other. But not all toxic bosses create entire toxic workplaces, but may create portions of toxic workplaces. So I think the toxic work boss or the toxic workplace is one where people are demeaned, they're debased, they're people where the boss thrives on humiliating, degrading, bullying. These are the screamers, the shouters, the abusers, both emotionally, mentally, sometimes even physically. These are the people that make your life a total living nightmare. It's not just
talking about me.
No, you're just difficult. There's a difference between difficult bosses and you're not difficult. There's a difference between difficult bosses and truly toxic. These are the bosses who really are, at the end of the day, they are probably toxic people. They're emotionally, psychologically, mentally, and probably physically abusive.
Can you move your mic down? You're pretty loud. You're just move it down a little bit.
You know I'm a loud person anyway.
Well, I have a note here for myself. One of the things on there says coaching voice right there on my notes to remind myself. So yeah, I can be the same. So so you bring this as the topic.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that let's just do this in the chat. Just put in the chat if you've ever experienced a toxic boss. Just put yes. Just type yes. And so we're going to find out the answer to the next question, I think, in a second, which is it's common. We'll just see. We'll just see how common it is. We got people from Guatemala. Look at all the yeses. Here they come. So why is it so common?
Yeah, so, it is fairly common. Let's talk about some of the statistics. Something like 65% of people say that they've experienced a mildly or highly toxic boss. 40% of people say they have one and they left a job because of a toxic boss. And then some studies show that they're fairly common. About 10% of, first of all, difficult bosses are very common, but the truly toxic goes about 10% of bosses actually go into the truly toxic range. And so this is far more common than it should be. I mean, we spend something like $15 billion a year on leadership development, and we still have toxic bosses. And I think that they're common for a couple of reasons. One is that organizations, as you know, they still don't do a lot on leadership development, right? So some try to, but they're really, what's the stat that Harvard Business Review delivered last year? Most people get their first taste of being a manager in their late 20s, early 30s, but they don't get trained on how to do it until their late 30s, early 40s. The other thing is that there's a lot of misguided, there you go.
Just saying.
Yep. Yeah. And the other thing that happens is oftentimes, and I think this is one of the big reasons, oftentimes what happens is that these toxic bosses are what we call the brilliant jerks, right? They're high performers. They get the job done. They're paying attention, or so it seems, to the bottom line. And companies are very kind of loath to do something about these people. Also, oftentimes, these toxic bosses sit at the top of the organization. And so who's going to get rid of them? Think about like Harvey Weinstein, Ellen, like you have all these organizations that have their toxicity sitting at the top. And there's also a misguided notion that you get, like when you push people, when you bully people, you're going to get more out of them. And it's so misguided. But really, there's so many reasons why they exist, and none of those reasons are good reasons. They're just the reasons why they are.
So someone said, I've had some not so, Nikki says, I've had some not so brilliant jerks. Well, but I think, if for those of you that were with us in the first session, when I was talking about the 3-0 model, outcomes and others. And some people get promoted because they're really good at the outcomes, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
They never learn, they're not self-aware enough, or they don't learn that there's another way to get there besides doing it themselves. It gets us micromanagement, leads us to not delegating, and all that stuff becomes toxic. Now, earlier, I made some comment, and then you said, wait a minute, Kevin, you're just difficult. So what's the difference between being difficult? So I don't know if I'm really difficult, how you can be a super fan. But anyway, so tell us the difference, Mary, between difficult and toxic.
So difficult bosses are hard to deal with. They're going to be annoying. They might be the micromanager. They might be the seagull. They might be the person with really high standards. But the toxic boss goes beyond the pale. So in many ways, it's really about frequency and potency of this bad behavior. So let's say your boss yells at you occasionally. Well, that's annoying, but are they toxic? But let's say they humiliate you frequently in front of other people. That's toxic. And so we really want to take a look at the bad behaviors, like the threatening, the demeaning. I want you to forget about like the micromanaging. That can be toxic, but usually the toxic behaviors are ones that are really about demeaning the person or demeaning their confidence or taking away all sort of accolades. They don't listen to you. They put you down. They're actually working against you. And I actually, if your people want to email me, I actually have a couple of quizzes that you can take to understand whether or not your boss is toxic or merely difficult. For example, if your boss gets mad when you don't deliver on time and kind of goes in a snit, maybe this happens once in a while, that's probably difficult. But if your boss is constantly screaming at you or constantly demeaning you or pitting people against each other constantly, that's toxic. Yeah, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, that's a great one, Anne. That can absolutely be it. So it's really about frequency and potency of this bad behavior.
So I think that email stuff that you just talked about, the email please, but Marissa, if you can put up the call to action, or Angie, whichever one of you is doing it right now, I apologize. There it is, learn more about Mary. And I think if you click there, that's in there. There you go. And someone tell me when you go there if it's not, because I don't have time. I can't do that at this moment. I can't handle it all. But if the email is not there, we'll have you give us your email, Mary. But I think everything's in there because I think you told us that originally. So here's what I'm noticing in the chat. An awful lot of people saying, I left the job I love because of the toxic boss.
Yeah.
And
you did the right thing.
Okay, Marissa is going to add the email to that page for you all because she's just that good. So thank you, Marissa. So that'll be where you can get that from Mary. So, I say all the time, the number one reason people leave a job is they fire their boss, right? They fire their boss. And they fire them because they're, in many cases, because they're toxic.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to hear some really scary statistics on toxic bosses?
Give us statistics, Mary.
All right. So here's a couple things that people need to know. Number one, if you're working for a toxic boss, nobody is coming to save you. I'm going to repeat that again. Nobody is coming to save you. You might hope HR saves you, but chances are, even though HR people are good people, they don't always have the power to save you. So you need to be thinking about saving yourself. The other thing I want you to know about toxic bosses is that it's going to increase your odds of getting sick. It will take a toll on you emotionally, physically, and psychologically. A couple of other stats about toxic bosses that may interest you is people that work for toxic bosses or in toxic workplaces tend to work there for 2 years longer than they do in similar organizations. And we can talk about why in a moment. The other thing you need to know about toxic boss syndrome is that it can take you up to 2 years to recover emotionally and psychologically and sometimes even physically from toxic bosses. So I'd love to hear from your people how long it took you all to recover. The mental health professionals are comparing toxic boss situations to PTSD and battered spouse syndrome. So you have to get yourself out. And I will tell you we can talk about why people stay in a moment, but those are a couple of stats for people to chew on.
Okay, so I've got some questions that have come in from the group. So, and by the way, for those of you that are here, you can look at those questions. You can vote on them. So people are voting on this one's gotten votes. Nikki asked, would sabotage fall into this whole toxic area where people are sabotaging folks?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it depends on if your boss just sabotages you like once, I wouldn't necessarily say it's toxic, but if the boss is constantly sabotaging you or others, especially to get him, her, or their selves up and keep you down, absolutely toxic. Absolutely toxic. Yeah, sabotage is toxic. Anything that's demeaning to the people. And sabotage often also comes with extreme narcissism. So mild narcissism, I'm not sure I would call that more difficult, but excessive, heavy, high narcissism, absolutely toxic.
So the first question that came in earlier is about executives. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times if we're experiencing it or we're experiencing it in a toxic workplace, the question is about oblivion from senior executives. Can executives be oblivious or complacent to managers down the chain that are toxic? What's your thoughts about that? And then I want you to follow that up with mismanaging up. What do we do? So you said that executives may be complacent or maybe oblivious. say more about that if you want. Anything else you want to say about that other than yes?
Yeah. Yeah. So what I'd like to say about that is, yes, that's absolutely true. So also often that happens for a couple of reasons. One, top executives aren't really paying attention or holding managers accountable for the people element. And depending on who are the toxic people, it just may never rise to them. Take an example, I'm sure you've all been hearing about the Ellen show, right? So there's no evidence that Ellen was toxic, but the people below her were, and it never raised up, apparently. But at the end of the day, the show has her name, so she does need to, I think, take responsibility for what's going on. McDonald's just had a big case where they were, the CEO got fired for one reason, but then they turned out that the head of HR was creating a toxic workplace. So I think it happens oftentimes, executives are too focused on the bottom line and not on the climate or the culture, so they may not know. Also, a lot of these people who are toxic are also very good manipulators. So they may be actively covering up or kissing butt, if you will. They are doing a way of managing up so that their bosses never know what a difficult environment they're taking. And then the third thing that happens with the executives is sometimes they will willingly and willfully ignore the signs. They are often the ones that have invested in these high performers. They've invested in these managers. And for them to say you're no good means that they had poor judgment.
Okay, so this is all pretty depressing, Mary. I'm just saying.
Yeah, it is.
You're giving us all these statistics. You're telling us all this stuff. And man, we've got all sorts of people saying, 2 years, I'm still flashbacking. 2 years, I'm 80% better. All those sorts of things. So let's assume the best for a second. There's a toxic boss, and that perhaps senior leaders are oblivious, blind, or whatever to it. What's your advice as the person who wrote the book about managing up? What's your advice? And it might not be executives. So Deborah said I had losing access to executives, but like, what's your advice about helping them see what they may not see? And I want to, before you even give that advice, I'm going to say, I believe you got to start with positive intent that those executives don't know or aren't aware how bad it is. So what advice do you have for us if we're in that situation as a leader and our boss not so lovely? What should we be doing in terms of the skip conversation?
Yeah, so there's really two you're going to have to decide, there's two kind of strategies you can take. One is, three really. One is, am I going to try to stay here? And if I do, am I going to try and change the situation by going above? Two, am I going to just try to save myself and get out, right? And three, am I just going to try to survive until I get out? So let's say that you do want to think about, I'm going to try and change the situation. So basically, I want to shed some light on it. What you want to be very careful of is making sure that you understand who you're going to go to. So if you're going to go to HR, before you do, and by the way, I love HR, but they don't always have the power. So you need to really be clear about how much power or influence your HR department has. If this toxic boss has been around for a while, then other people may have also gone to them. This could either bode well for you or it could bode poorly for you. So you really want to check around to see how empowered is your HR department and are they going to be able to help you. That also goes for your executives. So let's say you do want to go to an executive. Because let's be honest, a lot of organizations have very small, most of us work for what's called small businesses. We may not have robust HR departments. And those are probably the hardest areas to be. You're probably better off in a large company with a toxic boss, has a good, robust HR than a smaller company. So let's say you do want to go to your boss's boss. Again, this can be very treacherous. I want you to tread very, very lightly here. I'm not saying don't do it, but you want to make sure you're building the case, which means you're going to want to get other colleagues involved. You're going to want to really build how many people have left because of this boss? What are the bottom line numbers here? How is this demeaning, debasing behavior impacting the bottom line? When you actually put numbers to the cost of toxicity, that's going to be the language of the boss above your boss is going to work. But those two strategies, you have to really know what you're getting into. And you also have to be very careful, because I can tell you just as many stories. I can probably tell you more stories of how that backfired than how it succeeded. If you go to your boss, boss's boss, and maybe they're really good friends, now you've got a target on your back. This is not good. This is not right, but I want you to be very careful. So that would be my recommendation for trying to go up the chain of command for that.
practical stuff. That's why we're here, everybody.
Yeah.
So I've got some really good questions in the chat. I mean, in the questions that I'm going to get to in a second, but I'm just curious, do you have any data, but what's your experience telling you? Is toxicity getting worse during COVID? Like, or is it getting, is that not a factor? Is it getting worse, or is that actually making it a little better? What's your thought on that?
I think that it's not getting worse. I don't know that it's getting better. I think it's getting different. I think the thing that's more helpful for some people is, which is one of my strategies if you have a toxic boss, is people don't have to see the toxic boss every day. There's some little distance you could put between you and the toxic boss, right? So that might,
really glad.
Right. So, yeah. So that might make it better, because that is one of the strategies you want to diminish as much encounter. But for some, their toxic boss may be worse because of this. They may be feeling more out of control. And that's one of the reasons why toxic bosses are toxic, is they need for some control. So for some people, this may be made worse, but for others, it may be made better. And it's a really good thing. I think the jury's still out. We'll know in a couple of months when we start to do some longitudinal studies of how it got worse or better.
Hey, that's Charisse, I'm glad to hear that's getting better for you. But here's one of the things I would say here's one of the things that I would say in general, what I've been saying to leaders, well, for years, but certainly since the COVID, is that you have fewer interactions with your team members than you did before, clearly, right? So every interaction has a bigger impact, right? Because there's fewer of them. Right. So if you watch football, yesterday there was one game. And so, hey, I've got a quarterback who's 80% completions. Well, he's not going to be 80% completions for the whole season, because there's going to be way more attempts. So when there's fewer attempts, everyone matters more in the big picture. So hopefully for some of you, if you're dealing with that situation, it's maybe hopefully it's a little better, at least for cities, and that's good. Yeah. Turn off my video during Zoom meetings. So I want to go to some of the questions that people have sent in.
Okay. And then let's talk about what you should do if you're not going to go up the chain of command.
Well, then do that first.
Okay, great. So first of all, So first of all, I want you to determine if your boss is difficult or toxic, right? Because that's a big choice you want to make. Because a toxic boss, you really do have to get out and save yourself. So let's say you determine your boss is toxic, and let's say you also determine that you're not going to go up the chain of command. You really do need to then decide how you're going to get out. And you do need to get out. Studies have shown that it's going to increase your chance of heart disease, stroke, and diabetes by like 60%. It will make you physically ill. You've got to save yourself. So, number one, I want you to start looking for a new job. It could be a new job in a new organization. It could be a new job in your organization, but you've got to start looking around. Number two, you have to literally put on a survivor mentality, put your golden psychic shield on. You've got to really start to protect your insides, your emotional state and your psychological state from the barbs of the toxic boss, because you are going to need your strength in order to get another job, right? And you're going to you're also going to want to diminish your association with this boss as much as possible. I think Nikki says she turns off the video.
Turning off the camera, right?
Whatever you can do to minimize the impact of this boss. I'm also going to ask you to create a support network, because we always think we're tough and we're strong, but we all need help and support. So I want you to have people, even if you have to pay people to be on your support, making sure that you stay positive, making sure you stay resilient, making sure that you are looking out for yourself and looking for new opportunities. Be very careful about who you badmouth your boss to, right? Or who you vent to, because that's one thing we know about toxic bosses. When they sense that you're onto them, they're going to lash out at you even more. So be very careful about who knows what's going on. Once you give your that
showing up. I mean, that connects to a lot of the things people are saying in the chat, right? There's clearly, is there a book coming on this, Mary? Because based on this chat, there should be one. Just saying.
I know, I should. And when you give your nose,
hold on, everybody. Now she has just said out loud that there should be, and she told the wrong person that, because I'm going to be coaching, I'm going to be urging, and all of that. So anyway, and there's all kinds of questions coming in on the chat, and so if you missed this earlier, if you can just copy those and put them in the questions, it will help us so we don't lose them. Because as you can all see, the chat is flying by. So that would be very helpful. So like Martha, I see your question, and others up above. Jessica asked one about her mom, and we won't get to all of them. Okay. So I'm going to ask a couple of, Brittany asked a question a bit ago. It says, respect and empathy are two of my core guiding principles in life and at work. How do you respectfully set a boundary with your toxic boss to let them know what behavior you'll tolerate and what you won't?
Oh, I love that. So first of all, it's very difficult. The thing about, I would first start with the request, right? And making effective requests is something that might work. And that is, could you do this, or would you do that, or might we do this, might we do this? And when you make an effective request, you want to be really clear about what you're requesting, whether it's behavior or whatever, why it's important, what it looks like, and how it's going to help them. That's really important for the toxic boss. So let's say your boss is constantly screaming and shouting at you. You might say, and I would wait until they're not screaming and shouting, perhaps. You might say, hey, it's really helpful for me when we talk if you could not raise your voice too much, because it kind of, whatever it means for you, like I kind of shut down when that happens, and I feel it's really important for me to be there for you, or whatever. Like, make sure they know what's in it for them. So requests are a great way to start setting some of your boundaries.
Yeah, I think that's great, because remember, there's always a power differential. Even if you've got a wonderful boss, a remarkable leader, there's still a power differential between them and you. And so the request is always the better way to go about it, but especially with the kinds of behaviors that we're talking about, right?
Yeah, because we're talking about toxic people, not just annoying, difficult people. We're talking about people who are toxic. And these people often have some pathological ness around them. Like maybe they're bullies or they're narcissists, but they're lacking the same things that you are trying to get. They don't have empathy or respect for others, right? So you have to remember, when we deal with them, I don't think we're dealing with people who are capable of actually having any self-reflection or understanding their impact.
Yeah, and so that gets at some questions that have come in. I think Ed made a comment that says, do you recommend going to that person themselves? And I think you're saying you gave us some tips about how to do that, right?
Yeah.
And I'd rather have someone. Ed says I'd rather have someone confront me one-on-one before going to HR or above me. And so I think you've sort of given us some thoughts about that. There've been a number of things that have come in the chat. I'm going to ask this one from Jessica before I lose it. It says, my mother is extremely close to retirement as a registered nurse, but has a toxic boss and toxic owner. Any advice for her? Yeah.
So ask your mom, how is she feeling? So what's her timeline? And then, because that's a tough one. And what can she do to shift herself into survival and hopefully enjoy it? If it's 2 or 3 years, that's a really long time. So this is a question really for you and your mom to figure out because you don't want her 2 or 3 years to be ruined. People bring toxicity home. So are there things that she can do to protect herself from that toxicity and make it out or make it through? And so that's kind of a choice she has to make. But I would recommend that if she chooses to stay, she finds some ways to not let that toxicity in, whether it's yoga, meditation, exercise. Sometimes it's just the reframing of understanding that person is a difficult, psycho, crazy person, and I'm not letting it bother me. So it's a tough choice, but if she chooses to stay, she's going to need to really gear herself up, gird her loins, as we say, mentally and spiritually.
Man, you got gird your loins, and you've also told us about the golden psychic shield. My lesson for the day, I've got to find myself a golden psychic shield, Mary. Yeah.
Gird your loins was a great line from Devil Wears Prada, where Stanley Tucci, she's coming in, when she goes, gird your loins.
Yeah, I do think I remember that now. I did not sleep through that movie. Someone said, there's a couple people asking questions about, is this toxic or not? Okay. But first of all, one of them, Martha asked the question, does your research indicate the same physical and mental negative impact, whether it's difficult versus toxic? Or are you really saying, toxic is where that stuff becomes an issue?
Toxic is where that stuff becomes an issue. Difficult, it depends on how close to toxic they are. Difficult bosses can be very stressful. They can be very annoying. They can be very frustrating, but they tend to sit more in the amygdala. And when that goes away, then your amygdala gets released, right? Your reptile brain gets released. The toxic bosses work on a whole nother level. Like they are really getting into your soul. They're really getting into your self-confidence. They're getting into your self-esteem. They're getting into your sense of self-worth and who you are and how you feel valued and whether you are validated as a person. And that is very damaging.
So we've got a question that's in the chat as well. I don't want to lose it. It's from the person who's joining me tonight to be during the debrief, Kat Coppett. She says, what do you do if you or someone you know has been labeled as toxic, but you believe you or they may be open to feedback and development?
All right, so I love it. If you think that you may be labeled as toxic, that's a beautiful thing. Like, then go check that out. Go find out. Take the quiz yourself and figure out maybe you are being toxic. So this is really, so yes, if you think someone's open to feedback, then go give the feedback. And this, you want to do this very artfully, very skillfully. They may not be aware all about the impact of their behaviors. They may not be aware they were labeled as toxic. One of my clients is this national construction company, and we were talking about this, and one of the managers, like top guys, was saying that one of his peers was labeled as toxic, and he thought this guy had no idea. So he literally let's say the guy's name was Dan. He literally sat Dan down and said, hey, Dan, I don't know if you know this, but your people hate you. They think you're toxic. And the guy had no idea. And he's like, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, the way you scream, the way you yell, the way you do this, that is like creating a toxic work environment. And Dan was mortified, and he was open to coaching, and he actually changed. Now, that's a very helpful story, but I am saying if you think someone has the capability for change or self-reflection, absolutely give them the feedback. It can be very helpful, but it has to come from someone that they trust.
We all have blind spots, right? Yeah. And that's a situation I call someone being blissfully unaware. Like, I didn't know. I can't do anything about it if I don't know. And so there's a point in the chat too that says you may think someone's a difficult boss because you haven't taken the time to figure them out or understand. Right. I can tell you all in the next session with Nate Regier, I bet you money we'll talk about some things that would help in that regard. I don't know exactly what Nate's going to talk about, but I'll bet that that's in there.
But that's really true, Kevin. It's really important when we're like labeling toxicity or difficult. Difficult is usually difficult for us because they operate in a way that is not the way we like to operate. They operate in a way that goes against our preferences, our priorities, our ways of being. So one man's difficult boss may be the next woman's dream boss, right? But toxicity tends to kind of cross all lines. It tends to bother everybody because it's about the dehumanizing behavior.
Yeah. So here's a question. I love this question that came in. And Thomas, I see yours. I'll try to get it to. Martha asked this question. As a boss, how do you deal with a, quote, eggshell employee? In other words, they hear you as screaming or yelling when objectively, here's a key word, when objectively you're not. And as an employee, how to evaluate yourself. So, I'm a person that ask my wife, and probably ask everyone on my team, probably in the last week, that, sometimes I don't think I'm actually yelling, but my voice isn't where it needs to be. Right. Yeah. And maybe sometimes objectively that's true, but either way, how do you deal with that person that maybe is hearing something that just isn't there?
Yeah. So I love that question. So, one way in through that conversation is to do some sort of a personality profile, like the DISC, right, Kevin? Because the DISC really shows like I'm a DI in the DISC. And so as DIs, we just get loud because we get excited and we don't know. And people think we're angry when we're not. So and then people who may be S's or C's are going to be very calm. They're going to talk very quietly, and that raised voice is going to feel very hard on them. I actually did a team building thing with a group where that was exactly the issue. The leader was a lovely person, but she was loud and she get excited and her voice would raise. And so we spent time talking about it. So one way into that would be to have like a meeting with your team and everybody talk about their personality. Kevin or I can do the DISC with y'all, but that's one way in, like really explain, understanding the impact of your behavior, and so you can understand from their point what the impact of maybe a raised voice is, and they can also understand the intent. And then maybe you could take it down a notch, and maybe they could take their eggshells up a notch. Like they could be a little bit more understanding when your voice gets a little loud. I think you have a conversation about it.
Yeah, and I think so I'll use me as an example. I know that sometimes my voice, that happens to me. And so if I sense that in the other person and say, you know what, hey, Lisa says my kids think she's loud. I don't think it's possible, Lisa, but maybe they do. But the point is, if you know that can be a tendency, then be willing to ask the question.
Yeah.
Hey, I listen, mine, that wasn't my intent. Right. And so use, right. Yeah. I use my outdoor voice indoors. Right. The other thing I said in here, coaching voice right here, coaching voice.
Now, the other thing is to own it, right? Is to say, like, to explain your behavior to your people. Say, listen, I know I get kind of excited sometimes and my voice goes up. I want you to know it usually doesn't mean I'm mad. I give you permission to, like, do this, like, take it down a notch or to interrupt me. Like, you want to be able to own what you think are kind of your challenges, and then give the people who work with you permission to inquire, step in, request different behavior.
All right, cool. So I'm asking my team a question because there's so many great questions here that we're not going to get to all of them. And so I'm finding out what we can do about that later. So I have to tell you, all of you, this is exactly what I was hoping, and that there'd be so many questions and so much engagement that all the stuff that I did would really not be needed. And I have a couple of questions I want to ask, darn it. And it's my show. So I'm going to ask a couple of other questions before we go, everybody. But you guys this is awesome. You're doing exactly what I was hoping for. This is fabulous. And clearly, Mary, you've hit a nerve for people. And so
it's sad, but true.
So I've got a couple of things. I'm going to kind of go away from the toxicity thing and Kevin and Mary about leadership for a couple of minutes before we go, if I can. And you've got by the way, you've got the link down below. Learn more about Mary, all the stuff there the email address is there now to ask for those things and all the other stuff. And so that's how you can get connected with Mary. And I certainly hope that you will do that. And we're going to give a couple more of her books in a couple of minutes. But Mary, here are a couple of other questions. So COVID is now 180 some days in, since the World Health Organization said global pandemic. So what have you done during this time to stay safe and to stay sane and have fun? Like, actually, everybody, I talked to Mary right when that happened on the Friday when it had been announced on Thursday. You and I had a phone conversation.
That's right. That's right.
Miami, I think.
That's right.
Have you been on an airplane since?
Nope. That was the last trip. Like, everything went shut down. Well, I'll tell you, Kevin. So I have to be married to like Dr. Armageddon. Not a real doctor, but definitely is like, he's been waiting for Armageddon his entire life. Like, he is Mr. Debbie Downer. So he already had N95 masks. Like, he was talking about this in December, like when he was reading about it in China. So he has had me under lockdown. We are 180 some days in. We haven't ordered pizza once, by the way, so I'm very proud about it. Like, on day 200, I'm going to order some pizza. I'm taking recommendations to the best pizza in DC. So we've just been locked down. I've gone to the dentist once. I had someone come cut my hair on the porch wearing 95 masks. But other than that, done nothing, seen nobody. Everything is virtual. So I haven't killed my husband yet, but we're making it through. We consider ourselves very resilient folks. I joke around saying I'm resilient like a cockroach. I will get through this and I will survive. But really, we've had great luck with our clients. Everything moved to online seamlessly. And so we're doing okay. We're not really having fun, but we're doing okay. Right.
So right now, in all of this, and it can be about the toxicity thing or not, what's your biggest tip? What's something that you think leaders ought to be doing right now that maybe they're not thinking about?
That's a great question. A couple of things. I think right now is a great time to get connected with your team. It's a great time to get connected with yourself, figure out really what your team needs. I think it's also a great time to do what we call after action reviews. Really take the time, look at what you learned during the pandemic, both as a leader, as a human being, as a colleague. Take some time to figure out how you're going to transition into the next phase. Many people are starting to go back to work. What's that going to look like? Make sure your people feel safe about it. What are your plans? So it's really about like really taking good stock of where we are now, where we've come from, and preparing for where we're going to go, because we're not going to be back to normal probably for a couple more months, probably till a vaccine is widely in use. So it's a great time to really start having those conversations with your team, and also showing some appreciation for what people have gone through. I don't have young children, but I know that people that do, this is a really tough time to be a working parent and at-home school teacher with your children. So really checking with your people, planning for the next phase, and showing some appreciation and gratitude.
Awesome. So what's the question that I should have asked you, or that you wanted me to ask you that I didn't?
Oh, you always ask such good questions. I would say the question you should ask me that you didn't. I'm going back. The toilet paper, Adrienne. That's funny.
That's true.
The question you should have asked me is why don't people leave toxic situations sooner? And here's, I really want to talk about that just for a second, because if we have all kinds of reasons for staying in these bad situations. While they're all valid, they're not necessarily good reasons. So reason number one, people stay in toxic workplaces is they have high meaning jobs. They like their job. They might be nurses. They might be working for a nonprofit saving the world. Like jobs they really like that have meaning to them, so they stay in the toxic workplaces. Number two, we fear giving up what we've earned, right? That loss of status. We've earned that corner office. We've put 6 years in here. We've got this salary. We don't want to lose it, right? And then the number three reason why people don't leave is they think that someone's going to come save them, that something is going to happen, that boss is going to change their ways. So I just really implore people who are working in a toxic situation to rigorously investigate your reason why you are staying. It may be valid, but is it the best reason? Like, oftentimes we get fooled by the economy of choice. Like, that's opportunity cost. That's sunk cost. You've already put that time in. What would happen if you put yourself to your next best use? What would happen if you chose happiness and positivity in your life in terms of your workforce? So that's really what I want people to go away with thinking. It's your life. You live it once. And your workspace should be one where you feel positive, productive, happy, fulfilled, not miserable, sad, defeated, and debased.
That's awesome. So I want everyone in the chat who agrees with me to type the word yes. Mary needs to write a book about this.
Okay, I will.
I'm just going to give you a little feedback about this, Mary. So if you all think this has been useful, just put a yes in there so that we give a little feedback to Mary, because we're talking about blind spots, and you might have one. See, there we go. Here they come.
I now have a request for all your people. If you think I should write a book, send me an email so you'll share me your story, because I got to have real stories. Oh, you guys are sweet. Everybody.
So Mary at careerstone.com, right? But it's also in, if you click this button, you can get all the resources from Mary, including her email address. And so that's what's going to happen. How about that?
Sounds awesome.
That. So here's the thing. Wow. Look at this. It's already Joe has already pre-ordered it. I mean, Amazon is fast, but they're not that fast. Just saying. Okay. I think you're getting some feedback, Mary.
Right.
You got a self-appointed accountability partner right here. So Tamara, I think the idea about buying a cushion for your chair is a good idea, actually. Just saying. So here's what I want to tell all you. We've got some other questions here, and everybody, we're going to figure out a way to capture those questions that we didn't quite get to, and try to one way or another. As I said to my team, Mary, at the beginning of this, we've never done this before, and so everybody, we've never done this before exactly like this. So we got some great questions. We're going to make sure that we go through. Marissa, make sure that's on the task list, please, that we'll go back and see the questions that we don't think really got answered one way or another. I tried to keep scanning through them, and I think many of them we got to, but if we didn't, we'll figure out a way to do that. Thank you, Marissa. That's fantastic. So for those of you that don't know, Marissa is actually in this picture back here behind me. Why? Because Marissa is my daughter-in-law. So she's in that picture back there, just saying. For all of you, now you can all say, oh my gosh, she works for him and is in his family, whatever. Okay, anyway, so anything else, Mary, you want to say? Thank you so much for being here. Anything else you want to say before we go?
I would say you have an amazing audience. So excited to be here. Thank you. Oh, Kevin will know this. Kevin did an introduction for me at LinkedIn to the LinkedIn Learning. I taped my remote course on managing up in July, and it's going to be coming out on LinkedIn, I think like September, October. Kevin, how long does it take for them to go post-production?
I would say anytime. You did it in July. I did mine last one in August, and they're saying before the end of the year. So I would say anytime. So if you are a LinkedIn Learning, if your company has LinkedIn Learning, or you have LinkedIn Learning, or you have the whatever they call it, the professional version, where you have access to the learning, Mary Abbajay, Managing Up, I know it's coming, and I'm so excited that it is, Mary. So thank you so much. So you can stay and hang for a couple more minutes if you want.
Sure. What do you guys got next going on?
I'm going to have Adrienne join us if I can find her, and we'll just do some stuff here for a couple minutes before we finish up. I'm still trying to figure out how to do all this, everybody.
I know, it's fun.
So
I think you're doing great.
We'll let Mary stay, and here comes Adrienne, I think, in a minute. So we said we were going to give some stuff away. There she is. They're both in the same state. They live in the same state.
These comments are cracking me up. I'm loving them.
Oh my God. Adrienne, are you in Washington, D.C.?
I'm actually in Richmond, but I lived and worked in D.C. for many years before I moved here. I've been in Richmond for almost 20 years now. But I grew up in western Loudoun County.
Nice.
And then I worked in the district for a couple of years, and I was in Tyson's, and now I'm down here.
Yeah. I've been to Richmond once. It was lovely.
Hey, the comment that just came in from Dana Edwards, who I know, hi Dana, is that this was great. It was helpful even in retrospect. So I think for all of you that maybe aren't in this now but have been in it, hopefully you are able to do, as we said earlier, is to connect what you're learning to, so I appreciate that feedback. That's useful. And for any of you that's your situation, right? I hope that's true. So Adrienne, we've got some stuff to give away, right? Are you ready to talk about that? LinkedIn. Right?
Yes.
We have go ahead. Here's what they're going to win.
Let's see. Our LinkedIn winner is Brittany Gunderson. Brittany Gunderson. So Lisa will, I forget, I'm not in charge of the chat anymore. I've just been chatting. Lisa will put in the email address that you need to send an email to with your contact information. So Brittany Gunderson. Beautiful.
And did we have someone? I haven't had a chance to look. I don't know if Chuck.
I randomly chose somebody from all of the questions. If you want to do one.
Take our question person. I'm going to ask Chuck if he can look, because I haven't had a chance to, and see someone that did the LinkedIn group. Or maybe Lisa can maybe do
the question person. So I just randomly chose Martha Foss.
Martha is also a winner.
Is our question
wonderful Managing Up book. Here it is.
I love the name Martha. It's one of my favorite names. Martha, my dear.
There you go. And can Lisa or Chuck, see, again, everybody, we're still learning here. Can you tell me who the first person was to join the podcast group? Someone wants to know how they win a book. Well, when we start the next session, we'll tell you how to win a book in the next session in just about, 8 or 9 minutes. So there'll be plenty of chances throughout the day to do that. I'm waiting to see if Lisa. So I'm going to make a couple of observations. We've got a couple of minutes here. Adrienne, anything that you take from what you just heard from Mary? Anything from this conversation?
Oh, well, I joked with you before the call that I was probably going to have PTSD in this.
Okay, the boss is going to walk out for just a second, and then you can talk about me.
From prior years, of course.
Well, I'm always reminded of this. I'll tell you all a story. One of the first times that Adrian came here, the team was smaller then, and we would have meetings here in the building. I think she knows what I'm going to tell. We would have our meetings here. And so the people that were from out of town would come in here. And so I would want to make it welcoming for everyone. And so in this where I'm at right now, this is Virtual LeaderCon headquarters, but it's also what we call Remarkable House, which is the house that we bought about 13 years ago or so to be our office. And so I always want to make it welcoming when people will be coming in, and even the people that live locally didn't usually come to the office. They work remotely. So I bought bagels and stuff and put in the conference room. She's smiling. So then one day Adrian said, Kevin, you remember what you told me?
I will just share that at
I'll let you finish the story.
toxic.
So go ahead and finish the story.
Well, the story is, please stop buying bagels and putting them out in the break room because I think someone's going to get fired. Because that is what used to happen at my old company, was that first of all, the way that they would fire people is they would get over this very annoying intercom system, the same one that my mom used to use when she would say, Adrian, could you come down to the kitchen? You had those two little buttons and you could push them because, we could just shout. And he would get on the intercom and he would call you. We had two different rooms. There was the oak room or the maple room. You would be let go. And then he would have snacks in the break room afterwards. And everybody knew as soon as there were snacks in the break room that somebody was going to be let go or had been let go. Or so I have all of this horrible things in my mind of whenever you were going to have bagels in the break room.
Adrian, if you were the one let go, will you then you went and had snacks with your friends, or did you leave and it was just the survivors?
It was just the survivors.
Oh my God. That's a great story.
Bagel to go.
That's going in the book.
So I have actually called that the bagels in the break room principle, right? So.
Well, actually, it started as donuts, and then eventually I got to the point where I said, look, I really don't even like donuts. So can we at least change this to bagels?
So Lisa, you'll be happy to know I figured out how to get where I needed to get. So Jennifer, Paquette. I don't know how you say it, Jennifer, but thank you for requesting to join the Remarkable Leadership Podcast group on LinkedIn, and you will get, a copy of Mary's book. And so, Jennifer, your first order of business is to go back and listen to the podcast that Mary and I did. And we didn't talk about hardly any of the, or very little of the same stuff. We talked very much just about managing up, how to move up, win at work, and succeed with any type of boss. You talked a little bit about it, but not nearly. Not really the focus. Because we all now know the next book for Mary Abbajay will be about the toxic workplace. And
it's going to be called Get Out, Run, Hide, Save Yourself.
Well, I told you that I thought. Go ahead, Adrian. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I told Mary that the title of the book, Managing Up, is perfect because that's what people call it. That's what it is and all that stuff. And so Get Out would be the good title for the next one. Just leave while you can or whatever, right? So thank you so much, Mary, for being here. I'm making sure where we're at with our next guests. We don't have our next guest yet, so we can sort of hang out for a minute here. I guess other than learning about the golden psychic shield, which is in my notes here, I think the other thing that you said, Mary, that really struck for me was you made the statement, you said, just because it's a valid reason doesn't make it a good reason. And I love that for the purpose that you gave it to us about staying with the toxic boss. Like, I get that. But I really like it because it's broad. That's a broader idea than just with a toxic boss. The idea of differentiating the difference between a valid reason and a good reason, I think, is useful, because oftentimes all of us hang on to say, well, we can make a case for something. Doesn't mean it's the right case. So thank you. I found that really useful personally. So, Mary Abbajay, everybody. Mary, we're going to release you back to the rest of your
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Mary.